History. When we hear that word, what is it that comes to our mind? Perhaps some dates, records, perhaps the names of some rulers and generals arranged neatly in an order. But did it mean the same for our ancestors? What was history for them? When they didn't have records, perhaps they imagined. And when they mixed memory with myth, they created story that made sense about their past. And this talk is going to about those stories. Somewhere in the 14th century, one bright morning, Sultan Firoz Shah Tughlaq stands beside a Ashokan pillar. That pillar had just been erected on a freshly built platform just a few days ago. For Sultan, it was a curious thing, covered in ancient inscriptions and lines that made no sense at all. Just a few days ago, the same pillar had been transported from a place in far-off Haryana from a village called Topra on the Sultan's orders. The Sultan looked at the pillar with curiosity. What do these markings say? He asked a Brahmin standing nearby. The Brahmin must have squinted at the lines on the pillar. Truth be told, he had no idea what those lines meant. But that's not an answer you give to a sultan when he asks you a question. So the Brahmin must have folded his hands, bowed his head a little, and said, Sultan, these words speak of you. They say this pillar won't be moved from its place until a ruler called Firoz will arrive. And see, here you are. The ruler must have smiled at that moment. The courtiers must have nodded. And the Brahmin must have exhaled a sigh of relief. But on that day, a message of compassion and morality by Emperor Ashoka, put up centuries ago in Brahmi script that won't be deciphered for another 500 years, turned into a prophecy for a medieval ruler called Firoz Shah Tughlaq. On that day, history gave way to storytelling, and truth made some space for myth. But somewhere in Bengal, in one of its rural villages, much after the time of Firoz Shah Tughlaq, a poet sat down to write something. His name was Madhavacharya, and what he was going to write would form a Bengali canon of literary text called Mangal Kavyas. Typical tales of gods and goddesses and their own moral universe. But what Madhavacharya was writing was something different. Because it had a particular demon in it that doesn't appear in any of the Mangal Kavyas centuries before or after. It had a demon called Mongol Daitya. So the story goes like this, that this Mongol Daitya received a boon from Lord Shiva. Using his divine powers, he started plundering the heavens. The Devtas, terrified and helpless, went towards goddess Chandi. The goddess rose to help them. And when she struck down the demon, she earned the name of Mongol Chandi. On the surface level, this sounds like any other story that you would read in any of the Puranas. But look deeper and you try to figure out why this particular text was written in a particular period and why this curious Mongol Daitya doesn't appear in any of the stories before or after. And you try to get some clues. So when historians analyzed it, they figured out that the date of the writing of this particular text matches exactly with the end of 16th century, which was exactly the time when Mughals were making inroads in Bengal. So when Madhavacharya wrote about Mongol Daitya, he used a word that the Bengalis had popularly known for the new rulers who were coming from the west, Mongols, or later known as Mughals. So that's how a story, a Puranic story, a typical story that we hear every day, turns into something that mixes history and myth. But the situation changes every time, right? The politics, the power structures don't remain the same. So within a century of Bengal annexation by the Mughals, the same reluctance towards them turns into acceptance. This new generation of poets of the courts of Bengali Jamindars now had to explain how did their patrons turn into rich Mughal Jamindars in the same land. So they use the same devices to explain that. So in one of these tales, a poet called Bharat Chandra Roy thought about a strange tale. The tale goes like this. Emperor Jahangir's general, Raja Man Singh, was sent to subdue Bengal, but he found his army starving and defeated. But a local ruler named Bhavananda, who also happened to be the patron of the poet, came to help them. The soldiers were dying like flies. When Bhavananda reached the Mughal army, he fed them, and with the blessings of the goddess, they could conquer Bengal eventually. But when Bhavananda was taken to the Mughal Darbar in Delhi by Man Singh, Emperor Jahangir refused to accept the fact that the goddess helped them in winning over Bengal. The tale says that Emperor Jahangir even called goddess a ghost. The goddess decided to take revenge, the tale says. She terrified the Mughal capital of Delhi. People starved. They started dying like flies. Only then did Jahangir realize the goddess's power. He then reinstated Bhavananda and started celebrating Durga Pujo in Delhi Darbar. So the story goes like this, that the Darbar became the scene of Durga Pujo. The emperor became the chief host. The women of the Mughal Zanana started doing Bengali Hulu Dhwani that people in Bengal typically do during auspicious events. So when Bharat Chandra Roy wrote about late 1600s, he was also mixing myth to tell a story about the past of his patrons. Now I'll come to some other things in our myth and history that tell you about the amalgamation of these two. For example, one of the verses in Bhavishya Purana written in 1700s tells about a curious story that Akbar was a Mukund Brahmin in a previous life. They say he was even a disciple of Adi Shankaracharya. In another curious story which relates to south of India, south of the Vindhyas, Professor Richard Eaton, who's a historian, he analyzed the accounts of Sufis of Bijapur and the area adjoining that between 500 years. And there's this curious thing he found, that those Sufis, when you read the accounts of their life from 1700s, let's say the Sufi existed in 1300, you find something different. They are described as warriors who came to conquer the land. And when he went back towards the time till they existed and read the texts that are closer to their existence, he found something different. He finds there is no mention of any conquering. It's all, the general Sufism, spirituality. So then he basically put this into context that why did these people write something else 500 years down the line? And he figured out that they were putting their political landscape into these texts because they needed to justify their existence against another force which was coming from the north, the Mughals, who annexed all these small southern states, Bijapur, Adil Shahi, Golconda, in the late 1600s. So that's how they were also defining their own present by using myth and reality of the past. But when we look at past and, our ancestors, we think, oh, they didn't have Chat GPT, they didn't have Google. So obviously they are going to do stuff like this, right? We will come to this conclusion that, oh no, we are better than that. We can just Google and figure out. We have Wikipedia, we have like books. We are better than that. We are not going to make the same mistake. But what I'm going to tell you is, we remain the same people. We are doing the exact same thing today, and historians hundreds of years from now will have to make sense of what we are doing and separate the myth from history and reality. So what I'm going to discuss is this curious case of Raja Suheldev, who's supposedly a Raja in a town in Bharaj. And this is a commemorative stamp that government of India issued some 6-7 years ago. But the interesting thing is that the only mention of Raja Suheldev is found in a hagiographical account that was written like 700 to 800 years after his existence. And because his existence itself is like hagiographical and there are no accounts that go to the time of 11th century when he's supposed to have existed, there are several videos on YouTube discussing which caste subgroup he belonged to. So there even one caste subgroup wants to own him, some other group wants to own him, and there's no clarity because it's all imaginary at the end. It was written 700 years after, if he ever existed. The writer Amish Tripathi has picked up another layer of myth on top of it, and he has written an entire book on it. So what I'm trying to say is that what problems that people faced to make sense of their past, we are also facing the same problems today. And people, generations coming after us, will have to make sense of the same in the time to come. Thank you. That was my talk, and these are the sources you can read further.